So welcome everyone to the webinar on business model transformation. I'm delighted that you've joined us. I look forward to spending the next hour with you. Let me just give you a little bit of background to myself and the organization. So my name is Jeffrey Tobias. I'm the Managing Director of the Strategy Group. My background is entrepreneurial, academic, and quite a while in the corporate sector working in the innovation space with Cisco Systems. A little bit of background on the Strategy Group. We partner with large corporates and governments around innovation, around addressing challenging problems differently, around putting the customer in the center. Some of the tools we use include design thinking. We're very big on empathy, starting with the customer, starting with the stakeholder, lean startup, rapid validation of business models, and we'll be talking about business models today, and very much around the experience, the customer experience. How do we co-create experiences? And those of you who would have attended my last webinar would have appreciated the focus today on experiences, not just in the corporate space, but in the government space as well. We are at the center of three domains. One, the corporate innovation space, where we work, as I mentioned to you, with corporates and governments around the country, but also the academic space. So I'm adjunct professor at the Australian Graduate School of Management. My focus is innovation and entrepreneurship. I see lots of MBA executives pass through AGSM, and it's delightful to be able to position ourselves at the global leading edge thinking of innovation and strategy. But we're also active in the entrepreneurial space. So I have 7 startup investments. We have a VC and a startup in our office. And the Strategy Group is positioned in the intersection of the corporate innovation space, the academic, deep rigorous thinking space, and also entrepreneurial startups, which puts us in a unique position to be able to bring all of those lenses to what we do. These are just some of our clients. We're very proud of our client base. As you can see, they cross many boundaries in terms of verticals: legal, airlines, food and vegetables, telecommunications, software, and we've been working extensively with governments, including the New South Wales government, around policy design and using innovation and design thinking to reshape the way policy is designed in this state and in this country. We're going to cover a number of elements around business model transformation today. We'll look at the changing landscape, because every organization today is in fact in flux. We'll look at the business model life cycle in terms of how organizations start, transform, and often become redundant. We'll then look at ways of transforming business models and some different frameworks that we can use for business transformation. Once we have a new business model, we actually only have a bunch of guesses, so we need to actually validate the business model, so we'll touch on that. And then we'll finish with some examples from our company where we've used business model transformation extensively for business impact and knowledge transfer. And then towards the end, I'll just touch on people and leadership and how having a new business model is great, but what you really need to be able to do is bring people along for the journey. Let's look a little at the changing landscape. This is a phrase that I use extensively. You know, I give a lot of talks to executives and to boards, and the feeling around the country and globally is what got us here won't get us there. You know, companies have been successful, they've grown, added people, we've had the GFC, so there's been costs down, but many organizations are still operating on the business model that they operated on many, many years ago. And the reality is that the customer demand has changed, and I touched on this in the previous webinar around customer centricity. The customer's demand has changed. The power has shifted from the organization to the consumer. And the reality is that many business models that have been successful in the past won't be successful in the future. And smart boards and CEOs around the country realize this. The question is, what do you do? So many of them know the what. Many CEOs and boards and governments know that what got us here probably won't get us there over the next 5-10 years. The real question is, what do you do? How do you transform a business model that in the past has been successful, maybe even today is successful, but probably won't? We're engaged with a construction company and with the CEO of that construction company, and the CEO was telling me the other day that if the business model that they use continues, probably in 5 or 6 years, their business won't exist. And it's a successful company. So we need to spend some time thinking about what are we going to do? We realize we need to transform. The question is how, and that's where we're going to spend most of the webinar, most of our session today. And if you look at the transformation that's happening, it's significantly scary. I mean, look at some of the verticals. So digital cameras, look at the decline from 2007 to today in terms of market share, billions of dollars, negative 66%, 87% decline in portable media players. Remember GPS systems? We'd buy GPS systems, stick them on our dashboard in our cars. You know, it's whether you had the TomTom, you know, which one did you have that was the favorite? 80% decline in portable navigation systems. We're all using, you know, Google Maps or Waze or some other navigation system on our phone. And this isn't from 1807 or 1907. This is from 2007, 11 years ago. So verticals can be very quickly decimated by uptake in technology, by uptake in new ways of thinking, and we'll touch on these in just a little while. Amazon has been a topic of significant interest in the retail space, not only in the retail space, but also generally across industry because of its focus on the customer. And there's the debate is raging around whether Amazon in Australia is in fact going to have the significant impact that it's had on organizations in the US. And it has had significant impact. I mean, if you look at Best Buy, you look at JCPenney, you look at some of the large retailers in North America, look at their market value in 2006, again, not 1806, 1906, but 2006, compared to their market value today and their change. JCPenney, 83% change in their market value. Sears, 95% in their market value. In fact, one of these, I think it may be Bloomingdale's, has now gutted one of its stores and is now using the real estate in its store for a co-working space for startups. And in fact is deriving rental and making, you know, reasonable money out of the co-working space in its store as opposed to selling, you know, shoes and t-shirts and clothes. So what do you think will happen around Amazon in Australia? Will in fact the Australian retailers follow the demise of the US retailers or not? As I mentioned to you, the jury's out. I think retail in this country feels that that won't happen. Our own point of view is that it absolutely will. And as Amazon ramps up its presence in Australia, its Amazon Prime offering, its video offering, its price cutting, and more importantly, its focus on customer and customer centricity, our point of view is that, in fact, retail in Australia will follow the significant changes that have happened in North America. Again, transformation can happen very rapidly. Look at Lego. Lego, we all know Lego, we like Lego. You know, some plastic bricks with bumps on top. You actually often wonder how that business model has sustained for such a long period of time. It was on the brink of bankruptcy, so it's gone through a number of iterations in terms of its profitability. But in 2015, it was seen as being a hugely successful company. So as you can see in that second paragraph, Lego's Danish founder refused to put the company in bankruptcy. It then rebuilt itself, and in 2015 was one of the world's most powerful brands. 2015, 3 years ago. 2 years later, significant woes once again. Replacement of CEO. The previous CEO is deemed to have expanded far too rapidly, not focused on the partners, not focused on the staff. And as you can see, 2 years later from the press report of huge success, now cuts 1,400 jobs and overhauls its entire organization. So transformation can certainly happen very rapidly and very unexpectedly. And so there are new rules and new ways of doing business. We talked a little about this in the previous webinar. There are new types of consumers emerging. Global competition is rife, and organizations such as Amazon are sweeping the globe in a way that we have not seen before. And again, Amazon is not just in retail, it's in financial services, it's moving into healthcare, it's moved into video, and not only video transmission, but video production. So the global competition is fueling disruption. People don't want products and services anymore. They want experiences. We remember experiences. Again, my favorite phrase of when you go to Bunnings to buy the drill, you don't want the drill, you want the hole. And in fact, you don't want the hole, you want the experience that you get of using that hole. So the business models that have been successful in the past aren't secure anymore. And if you're in a vertical where you think they're secure, I put it to you that perhaps you need to rethink that view, because as you've seen, transformation can happen over a space of just a few years. We don't know what's ahead of us, and technology continues to fuel innovation, creativity. Artificial intelligence is a significant buzzword at the minute, and it will be interesting over the next 5-10 years to actually see whether artificial intelligence and machine learning has in fact had the impact that it has. Again, our point of view is that yes, artificial intelligence and machine learning is transformational, but in many ways it's not new. I taught it at the university in computer science back in the 1980s. What's changed is the cost decline in memory and the rapid increase in computing power. And certainly that has fueled opportunities to use artificial intelligence and machine learning to affect even further transformation that we've seen today. So I just want to spend a little bit of time on the business model life cycle. You may have seen this picture elsewhere. It's an interesting picture. So in 1960, not all that long ago, the average lifespan of an S&P 500 company in the US was about 60 years. So you started a company, took it public, and that company would last for around 60 years. But you can see the dips in 1970, 1985, but look at the trend line going down. And the projections are that in about 2025, not all that far from now, the average lifespan of an S&P 500 company will be about 12, 13 years. So and we're talking about lifespan. So that is from inception through to destruction, through to when the actual company closes. And 13 years in the lifespan of a publicly listed organization is very short. The other thing that's changing and fueling this business transformation discussion is the startup space. And we mentioned to you that we're significantly embroiled in that, enmeshed in that startup space. If you go back 18 years to 2000 and said you're going to set up a startup, the average people would say you need about $5. Average cost, set up a startup, $2,005 million. Look what's happened in the space of 5 years. We've moved from $5 million to $500,000. And in 2009 to $50,000, and now you almost don't need any money to set up a startup. Maybe $12.50 for getting a domain name, and the rest you can pretty much get for free until you actually get traction and product market fit before you need investment. And so if you look at the life cycle from the startup space to the decline, right? So we've talked about cost to set up a startup is really little. Average lifetime of an organization is shortening. What does that journey look like from startup to decline? So we start off being entrepreneurial. You know, we'll end up with a dip in our life cycle because we need time to build traction. At some point, we'll get traction. Once we get traction, product market fit in our startup, we'll get growth. We'll go on an upward growth cycle until we get to maturity. And maturity comes in different forms. Maturity comes in commoditization. Maturity comes in the market shifting, as we saw with, for example, GPS systems and point-and-shoot cameras. So we're going to get to a point in maturity. It's going to happen. And if organizations don't think that's the case, again, that's not true. It will happen. And of course, then we can potentially go down the slippery slope to decline. And the really danger zone is here. And the danger zone is here because many organizations don't actually see that maturity and plateauing is on the horizon. Growth has been strong. If you look at the left-hand marker, and the challenge for boards and executives in that left-hand marker is to realize where they actually are. Are they at the bottom of the growth curve and still have opportunity to grow? Or are they approaching the danger zone where, in fact, just not too far away is maturity and decline, and they need to actually pick up another S-curve, another business model, because if they don't, they'll go over the top of the maturity curve down towards decline. And of course, the last position a business wants to be in is trying to pick up a new business model at the point of decline. It's much tougher. It's much simpler and much safer to realize that the point of maturity is happening and look for a new business model at that first market point. So when growth is still there, profitability is still there, and the smart CEO and board says, you know what, we need to think differently. We need a different business model for all the reasons we've talked about. So what do we want to do in terms of business model transformation? We want to, at point B, as you can see on that left-hand side, before we get to maturity, pick up a new model. And the questions that this raises is how do we do that? How do we run a successful organization and still deal with transformation and uncertainty in the marketplace? How do we bring an organization along for the journey? How, in fact, do we define what that new business model is? And how do we evaluate and implement a business model that could, in fact, disrupt and in many times destroy the model that's actually got us to point B? And how do we actually prevent ourselves from going over the top to point A and finding that it's then really, really difficult to come up with that new business model? What should we be doing at point B to actually realizing we are close to maturity and we actually need a new business model before we get over the hump to point A? Significant questions. And if you look inside boards and executive groups of most organizations, smart organizations in this country and globally, these are some of the questions that sit on the agendas of boards. What are we going to do about our business model, and how are we going to transform? And one could argue that every business model will go into decline. But for the organizations that are smart and realize transformation is needed, it's not a done deal. It's not inevitable. And it comes back to leadership, and it comes back to vision, and it comes back to not being just driven by quarterly results if you're a public company, or in fact, election life cycles if you're a government. So picking up a new business model should just become part and parcel of an organization lifespan. So we launch a business model, we deliver it, it will grow, and just before the critical point, just before maturity, we actually launch a new business model. So we have a series of rolling, always on transformations. So those of you who are part of my previous webinar, you know, understand that what we're living in a world of disruption. We're living in a world of uncertainty. And if we're not constantly questioning the business model, at times like this where it's April, organizations are thinking about new business planning for June, for July, the new financial year, you know, the retreats that organizations have. You're probably planning a retreat in June to build your business model, to build your business plan for the new financial year or the next 3 or 5 years. This sort of thinking is vital, and on a rolling basis, and building it into the life cycle of thinking around business planning is fundamental. It's not a one-off exercise. So let me give you some examples of different business models, and some of these you'll know, and some of these maybe may give you some there may be some insights into products we use on a daily basis. So the razor and the blade, you know, Gillette gives away the razor blade, the razor almost, because you're going to spend lots of money in your life over the blades. Printers, we know it. We can buy a printer for $90. The ink, a set of inks cost $150. The printer is a loss leader. The money comes from ink. Nestle transformed itself with Nespresso. You know, if you think about Nespresso, it's coffee. There's no greater commodity in the world than coffee. We can buy coffee anywhere in a supermarket. We can myriad of coffee shops. Coffee, total commodity. And Nespresso says, you know, we'll put a small amount of coffee in a little pod, charge 60 or 70 cents for it. Cost to us is probably 2 or 3 cents. Sell the machine that will force people to use our pods, and hence transform our business model from either selling coffee or the machine to the recurring revenue. And you can see other examples that we're familiar with. The Kindle, for example. Again, loss leader on the product, but you're going to get the subscription service. So the razor and blade is, you know, the idea of giving away a product cheap, and then having sustaining revenue is a common one. Freemium is another one. So we're all familiar with freemium. Sign up to Skype, sign up to LinkedIn, sign up to Dropbox, sign up to the service at a free level, but then you find very quickly that if you want to do something significant with it, you need to pay. And so the paid model supports the freemium model. And there was a while where people were questioning Dropbox, for example, where in fact, you know, 1 in 100 people were paying and 99 people were using Dropbox for free. But if you do the maths and you look at the costs, you actually find very quickly that that business model is an excellent model. And the valuation of Dropbox, as I'm sure you know, is today's huge. So this model is about start with free, build the customer base, start the customer paying, and then if you do the maths, the lifetime value, and the startup people talk about, you know, LTV, what's the lifetime value of a customer? And in your business model, you should be thinking about what's the lifetime value of each of your clients and your customers, not looking at the one-off or the short term, and building a business model where that lifetime value is significant. Peer-to-peer, we're all familiar with Amazon, with Airbnb, you know, eBay, Couchsurfing, Airtasker, where people are engaging other people for a particular service. You know, I'm bypassing, I'm not going to Airbnb for Airbnb to provide me a service. I'm going to an Airbnb to be the facilitator for me to engage with a peer around the particular service. So again, the idea that a business model is a facilitator of experiences, as opposed to a provider of experiences, is yet again a different business model. Subscription is really interesting. So subscription is, again, I sign up, for example, to Salesforce. I want to keep using their services, but I'm not going to buy a product from them. I'm going to subscribe to a product. If you look at what's happened, for example, in the software space, there's been a rapid movement from purchasing software. You remember we used to go to Officeworks, or we used to buy Office, or we used to buy antivirus product. That entire business model has moved from I buy a product to I subscribe to a product. Why is that really valuable, and why do many organizations aspire to moving to a subscription model? It's because I can forecast my recurring revenue. So once I've got a customers engaged and money that just comes off their credit card on a month-by-month basis, I can now look forward and almost not guarantee, but have a pretty good idea of what my forward-looking revenue is going to be, as opposed to the older models where you come July 1, the new financial year, you start back at zero and you need to then go and sell new products and services. So many organizations would love to have subscription business models. The challenge is, how do you do it? What's interesting is the airline model. So some of you will know that airlines today don't, in the main, buy engines anymore. So Rolls-Royce came up with this concept of pay for thrust in many ways. So they will give the engine away, and they have a monitoring station that monitors the usage of that aeroplane engine and bills the airline for the usage as opposed to for the engine itself. So this was actually started back, in the early 2000s, when Rolls-Royce was looking to keep up with the demand for aeroplane engines, and the aircraft companies were unable to fund the balance sheets to pay for Rolls-Royce. So it's a very different model was provided. So GE, for example, has what's called On Point, which is sold to the airlines as power by the hour. Again, the airlines don't pay for the engines, but they pay for the time that they're flying. The benefits for both: the airlines only pay for the flying time, but of course their goal is to keep the planes in the air for their financial model. Keeping the planes in the air means that the aeroplane engine is going to be running as much as possible, and of course GE wants that, and of course it puts the pressure on GE and Boeing to service, and Rolls-Royce to service those engines as quickly as possible, which puts them back in the air, which gives the airlines opportunity as well. So it's interesting how it's not just a one-sided model. In a subscription model, you end up with double value on both sides. I'm not sure if you're familiar with MoviePass. So MoviePass is a relatively new business model in the US. Again, a subscription model. Take the normal way of going to the movies. You buy a ticket, it's $10, $15, $20, $25, whatever sort of service you want. MoviePass has been launched in the US. You pay a subscription of $6.95 a month. For $6.95 a month, you can go to as many movies as you like. When you go to the movie theater actually collects from MoviePass the entire amount. How does that work from a business perspective? Well, it's a bit like my gym membership. I pay gym membership once a month. In theory, I'd go to the gym 4 times a day. I actually don't do that. So for the time that I'm actually not at the gym or MoviePass is actually collecting my money. So think about this from a movie theater owner's perspective: significant risk and significant transformation to the traditional business model of just going to the movies and paying for the ticket. And finally, in terms of these examples, Tesla. So the traditional car model is, on the left, you build a car, you work on the car, you build the car, you give it to marketing. Marketing then does promotional campaigns, and you sell the car. Tesla says we're going to do something different. We're actually going to market the car, sell the car, and then build it. And what's interesting with Tesla is in 2016, they opened marketing for pre-orders of their Model 3. They then had 200,000 customers that had paid deposits on the car, but the actual production line did not exist. So it was only after they started actually marketing and selling the car did they actually start the production line. So again, a very different way of looking at traditional business models. So given these examples, what are some frameworks? I'd like to share some frameworks on business models to enable you to build that new S-curve, to pick up the new opportunity before your business model moves into decline. So the business model canvas is a model that we like a lot. We use it with our clients a lot. It allows you on a page to depict a business model in its entirety. You know, organizations traditionally have written business plans. I'm sure many of you on this webinar will be familiar with business plans. You know, documents that go for sort of 20 or 30 pages, take 3 or 4 months to produce, lots of meetings. The feeling at the moment is that, one, no one reads the business plan, and two, by the time you've written the business plan, much of it has moved on and changed, is obsolete. And thirdly, a lot of what's written in the business plan is conjecture, it's hypotheses, and we'll come back to that in a minute. So if we look at this business model canvas, it's a much better way, a much clearer way of starting to understand what are the elements we need to define and build our new business model. So if you look over on the left, on the right, we've got to start with our customer segments. Who are our customers? If we don't understand what problem we are solving for our customers, and in fact, do our customers have a problem, what's the point of going on with the rest of the business model? Once we understand the problem to be solved for our customers, we can then say, well, what's our value proposition? And we touched on the value proposition canvas in the previous webinar, and the value proposition canvas actually fits directly into this business model canvas, the value proposition and the customer segments. So we need a value proposition. Without a value proposition, there's no point even moving on to partners or cost structure. We then need to understand, what are we going to do with those customers? We now have a value proposition and customer segment. What are we actually going to do with them? How are we going to capture them? What are we actually going to give them? What's going to be their lifetime value? And then also, what are our channels to market? How are we going to get to our customers? Is it through channel partners? Is it through a direct model? Is it a subscription model? Is it through an intermediary? Is it through brokers? So what are the channels that we need to go through to actually deliver the value proposition to our customer segment? Once we've done the right-hand side, which is, is there a problem to be solved and is there a value proposition, we can now start talking about, well, who are we going to partner with? Who are our key suppliers? Who are the organizations that we need to deliver this value proposition? What are the activities in the business model? What are we actually going to do in this business model? And what resources do we need? Because without the funding, without the people, without the intellectual property, our business model may not work. So we need to, obviously resource the business model adequately. And then if we move down to the bottom, how are we going to make money? What's the revenue stream of this business model? And just as importantly, what's the cost structure? So now we come to the profitability model of the profitability of our model. So in our company, we really like this business model canvas. First of all, it embodies the value proposition canvas. It's focused on the value proposition and the customer segments, but it embodies in a very simple way the 9 elements needed to build a new and successful business model. Very quickly, if we look to fill this out for Amazon, you can see, so the yellow post-it notes are Amazon's retail business. The purple post-it notes are Amazon's Kindle business. You can see the customer segments are the mass market. For the consumer, the value proposition from Amazon is price and convenience. It's cheap and you can get it where you want it, how you want it, when you want it. The relationships with Amazon are, automated and self-service. I'm going to buy it the way I want to buy it. Channels of Amazon are, mobile, and in the Kindle business, other retailers. Key activities towards the left, merchandising, resources. Well, we need warehouses for the physical business and a platform for the Kindle business. On the left, we've got the Amazon marketplace. So there's suppliers and manufacturers of the product that Amazon's going to sell, but also the network of sellers on the marketplace. And for the Kindle business, we need publishers. Amazon needs publishers. If you look at the revenue stream, where is revenue going to come from? Well, it's going to come from retail sales in its traditional business, commission from the Amazon market business, and subscriptions through Amazon Prime, and from the Kindle business, the ebook business, from selling ebooks and content. And over on the left, the cost structure, it's going to be very cost driven and leverage economies of scale. So you can hopefully see a very quick sample of how you can use this business model canvas. What's interesting though is, we can race off and come up, we can, go out for a day or 2 days with our executive team, say, guys, there's this new model, there's this new canvas, but really what we've still got to do is manipulate those sticky notes. We're going to spend a fair bit of time searching for what really is our business model moving ahead. What we want to do is to be able to go from search to execution. We want to try and get some certainty that in fact our business model is in fact going to deliver what we think it is. Otherwise, we've just got a bunch of hypotheses. And when we fill out the business model canvas initially with what we think is our value proposition, what we think our customer segments, what our key activities are, maybe for your 2019 financial year or for your next 5 or 10 years business model, really what you still have on that business model canvas are a bunch of hypotheses. They're a bunch of guesses. And the interesting thing is, how do we spend how can we shore up our guesses? How can we validate, or in fact, even more importantly, invalidate some of these hypotheses? So what we need to do is provide some lenses on this business model canvas. And the 3 lenses that we like are desirability, feasibility, and viability. And the first lens that we need to apply to our business model canvas is desirability. If we come up with a new business model and people don't want it, there's no point even addressing feasibility and viability. There's no point. But a lot of people, a lot of organizations do it the wrong way around. Yes, we've got some ideas and this is how it will make money. And yes, we've got some resources to be able to do it. And we can spare, it'll fit into our existing business, and it'll be, and here's our profit model and here is our cost model. But what we learned from the startups is that without traction, without product market fit, without a problem to be solved, without desirability, working on feasibility and viability and kicking off that business model gets you nowhere. So we can overlay these 3 lenses of desirability, feasibility, and viability onto the business model canvas. And it's interesting to see how these fit. So in many ways, the right-hand side of the business model canvas, the value proposition, the customer segments and relationships, is all about desirability. The left-hand side, the partners, the activity, the resources, is about feasibility. Can we actually execute? And the cost structure and revenue stream down the bottom is about viability. Is in fact it able to be executed? Another way we can look at that is risk. So the right-hand side of the business model canvas gives us product market and opportunity risk. Is in fact there a market, and how risky is that market? On the left-hand side, we're focused on execution risk. When we execute, what's the risk of our partners? What's the risk of it? The resources we think will happen won't actually be able to be supplied. And of course, down the bottom, we've got financial opportunity and risk. So it's interesting to take the business model canvas and the hypotheses and apply these 3 lenses, viability, desirability, feasibility, and viability. And ultimately what we want to build is a set of experiments And this is, important, and it's a whole other topic in itself around how do you build experiments to validate or invalidate these hypotheses that we've got. And we're looking from some experiments will give us some weak evidence, some will give us some strong evidence. Sometimes we can do experiments in a very short period of time. Sometimes some experiments are going to take a long period of time. And we want to build up a bank and plot the experiments in a 4x4 like this to be able to have an opportunity to look at experiment library that we're going to use to validate or invalidate our new model. And the reality is that the stronger the evidence, the more extensive our library, so the stronger the confidence level. That the more that we can build experiments, the more rapid that we can actually execute on the experiments, so our confidence level will go up. And I just wanted to give you a tool because, as I said to you, there's a science to doing this. This is now validation of hypotheses in a business model is actually a science. And there's some tools around the ability to validate, invalidate, or retest. And one of these comes from Strategizer from Alex Osterwald, called the Progress Board. And the way you use this is you come up with a bunch of hypotheses on the left-hand side. You then start to formulate tests for each of those hypotheses, experiments for each of those hypotheses. You then come up with some metrics, which is the measure, where you need to define how are you going to measure success or failure for each of the experiments that you're going to run on your riskiest hypotheses. Run the experiment and you'll learn from that experiment. And there'll be one of three outcomes. One is the hypothesis will be invalidated. Didn't work. We thought that our partner model was going to be X. We ran some, rapid experiments and found that those partners were not going to be the right partners. Okay, that's fine. And in fact, isn't it great that we've invalidated that hypothesis early rather than going down the track with a business model that wasn't going to work? We may run some experiments and find that we need to go back and run some more. The results are actually unclear. Or in fact, we find that the experiments are validated, and that then moves to sort of our thermometer bar on the right-hand side to help us actually understand how close are we to a business model that we could actually put into play, even if it disrupts, for example, our existing business model. So let me give you an example of how we've done this in the strategy group. I'll give you just one example. We use this sort of methodology over and over again with our clients, and it's very successful. Let me give you an example of the SCENTRE group. So SCENTRE group in Australia runs Westfield in Australia and New Zealand. So Westfield, there's Westfield Inc. in the US and SCENTRE group in Australia. And we worked with SCENTRE group around 3 potential business models. And this is not confidential. There is a case study of this on our website, the strategy group website. And they came forward and said, look, we have 3 potential business models. One is we are considering a business model around a loyalty scheme for our customers. Another business model was around drop-off zones where parents could leave kids while they went shopping. So I go shopping, I've got a small child, I want to have my hair done, I want to go to the movies, I want to have lunch. I could drop off my child at a safe and secure play zone, child minding zone. And the third business model was around activating unused space in a mall. So if you think about it, before a Westfield opens, there's a lot of space that's unused that could be used by organisations or could be monetised, either in the centre or, for example, think about a car park. Car park closes, no one's in the car park, but there's a lot of unused space, or on a rooftop, for example. So we worked with SCENTRE Group, and what we did actually was set up 3 startups within the organization. So he said, well, let's set up 3 startups using the business model canvas. It was a significant investment by SCENTRE Group, 9 people, 3 team members in each startup, found some additional space in Westfield's head office, set up a startup environment, spent 9 weeks going through each of the elements in a business model canvas. So each startup had a view that they had 9 weeks of funding and then the lights would go off. Think like a startup, built like a startup in a corporate, which was a very interesting and exciting model for both SCENTRE Group and for us. We managed this entire process, and each of the startups started with the business model, a business model canvas that they envisaged as the business model for each of these initiatives, and went out every week and ran real experiments with real people to validate or invalidate each of the 9 boxes in the business model canvas. Who is the customer segment? What's the value proposition? What partners do we need? What's the revenue model? What's the resources model? And after 9, and as they went out and ran, each of them had to get out of the building and think like a startup that has a 9-week runway of cash. And as they validated or invalidated each of the elements in the business model canvas, they would cross the elements off that were invalidated, but invariably come up with new ways of thinking. Let me give you one example. So the hypothesis was that SCENTRE Group would produce a reward card. There's a Qantas card, a Myer One card, David Jones card, a new reward card. What they found when they went out to the customer segment, that their value proposition of a shopper reward card was not what people wanted. People said, you know what, whatever you do not give me another reward card. In fact, we've got a photo of a lady who reached into her handbag and took out a plastic bag full of rewards cards and said, whatever you do, don't give me more to add to my bag. So the value proposition of let's produce a reward card, which would seem pretty obvious, was in fact invalidated. What we heard through the process was that what people didn't want was a reward card, but one of their significant pains was parking. A lot of us feel this way. It comes close to the 2 hours, we sort of drop everything and we want to take our car out of the car park. It's not about the money, it's about the fact that we don't want to pay at all. So parking came up through the experiments that they ran as a really significant issue. And then they started thinking, the startup started to think, well, if it's not about a reward card, what if we provided parking as a reward? So the more you bought within the centre, you got parking credits. And in fact, we worked with the startup that was working on this to actually dummy up. So we had people who would stand in a store, sort of stand back a fair bit, and when someone bought something for say $1,000, they'd go up to them and say, excuse me, so would you like some additional parking? And they'd say, oh, that would be great. So we said, could we borrow your ticket? And then we had a runner that took the ticket, ran down to the control room, revalidated the ticket and ran back up. So there was no automation, because what's the point in automating the process if we can't validate or invalidate the hypothesis that there's actually a value proposition here? So it's a very quick and rapid and low-cost way of running experiments, but it proved really valuable. And I won't go into the details of what's now transpired, but this has uncovered significant millions of dollars for the organization, and has been taken many stages further. And each one of these initiatives, the business model that we ended up with at the end of the period was significantly different to the business model that the startup started with, but it was a validated business model by a bunch of experiments. So I wanted to touch in the last few minutes on people, but just let me summarize where we've been. So we've talked about organizations needing new business models to combat disruption. We've introduced the business model canvas, which we feel is an excellent way for describing a business model. 3 lenses need to be applied to that business model: desirable, feasible, and viable. And the key one is desirable. We've got to start with desirable, not with feasible and viable. Is this business model desirable? Will people sign up? You know, what's the experiment that we need to actually work out whether they'll sign up? Will they subscribe? Is there a problem to be solved? And then we can work out the feasible and viable component. We should validate our business model by running simple, low-cost, low-fidelity experiments, starting with desirability. That's really key. And by doing so, we can significantly de-risk the business model. And then I've given you a tool, the progress board, where you can work, use it to keep track of your experiments and the hypotheses in your business model. And in that progress board, what you want to do is start with the riskiest hypotheses, the riskiest ones, the ones which, if those hypotheses don't work, the rest of the hypotheses aren't even worth addressing because the business model will fail. And often people don't do that. They start to validate elements of a business model that are in their comfort zone, what they feel comfortable with. It's not the way to do it. And then in summary, what got us here, what won't get us there. And hopefully the tools that I've given you, the discussion that we've had around the business model, desirable, feasible, and viable experimentation, will give you some value as you start to plan your next financial year's business model. So when you go into business planning mode over the next, few months, think carefully about not just taking the business model that you had last year and adding 10 or 15% to it, or adding a few more people, but stepping back and thinking through, will in fact what got us here get us there? And I wanted to just conclude around people, because we can do all of this, but unless we bring people along for the journey, unless we can actually bring our organization and embed this new business model in our organization, we won't succeed. So I just wanted to end with what's known as Kotter's 8 steps. How do you actually do this from a people perspective? First of all, once you define this business model, you need to create a sense of urgency. So there needs to be a burning platform. People need to realize, and the staff and the team and the board need to realize that there is a burning platform, because unless people realize it's a burning platform, the likelihood is people will think the new business model is interesting but not essential. Then you need to build a guiding coalition. So you need to build and form people around that burning platform who are going to help drive and implement the business model. Once you've done that, it's the creation of a strategic vision. What's the vision of the company using this business model? So that needs to be crafted and created so that there's a vision that can be conveyed by the guiding coalition around the sense of urgency. And then there needs to be some volunteers, and volunteers that the guiding coalition is able to enlist in terms of to affect the business transformation. Then there'll be blockers, and we see this often. We call it the frozen middle. The board wants change, the executive wants change, the staff says change is essential, and there's a layer of executives, often the frozen middle, that are blockers. And one way or the other, and we can talk about this another time, those blockers need to be removed. So action needs to take, otherwise those blockers will destroy the opportunity. We then need to demonstrate some short-term wins, because otherwise people become very cynical. Oh yes, we've heard it all before. We're going to transform. That was discussed a year ago and nothing's happened. So some short-term wins is important. And then how do we sustain the short-term wins? How do we sustain acceleration? And then we need to institute that change. We need to build that new business model, bake it into our organization. So I just wanted to touch a little on how do you bring people along for the journey. That's a bit of a roadmap for you. And really what you need to think through is the combination of what's the new business model and how will you bring your organization along for the journey. So I want to thank you very much for being part of this webinar. We are passionate about all of the elements we've talked about them here. We use these with all of our clients on a daily basis. It's really exciting for us to be in the time that we're in, because so many verticals are transforming and governments are looking at how do they transform policy design, for example. So we've been using all of these techniques and design thinking with New South Wales government around significant policy design issues. So it's not just in the corporate space, it's not just in the government space, but people are realizing overall that we really need to convince ourselves that what got us here will get us there, and if we're not convinced, to transform our business models. So thank you once again. Please keep in touch. We'd love to connect with you. If you're looking at your next year's planning model, your next year's offsite, your next year's strategy session at board level, executive level, or even down at your business level, at your business unit level, we'd love to engage and continue this discussion. At this point, I think we're pretty much at top of the hour at 11 o'clock. So we'll sign off. Again, please keep in touch, keep the conversation going, and thank you again for participating in this discussion. All the best and have a good day.